Welcome aboard to a late night edition of whatever we're going to call this right now, which is the Jackrabbit Postgame Show, FCS Postgame Show. I'm Zach Borg. I'm joining you with the Jackrabbit Illustrated guys. It is very late, midnight, although I'm usually up at this time anyway, doing stuff for Dakota News Now on a Saturday night because we're usually it's our Saturday. It's a work night for me, needless to say, and a Saturday night in college football season. We're on late anyway. I'm still posting video, but the SDSU game just finished not too long ago, actually, and let's talk a little Jackrabbit football. Let's talk some of the FCS and the other stuff going on. There's still a few games, but what a first game! What a start to the to a post-game stream, I guess, as South Dakota State wins 22-16. The Jackrabbits, I don't know where to start with that game. Do you folks? I'm sure a lot of you guys are just getting back. I know the Jackrabbit Illustrated guys, we were going to start this at 11. They are all finally, I think, hopefully back home. Any of you guys back on the stream with me now? I don't know, but yeah, it was quite a game. South Dakota State, pulling up the stat lines here a little bit. Very rough first half. If you were at that game, it was 10. Frankly, they're lucky it was only 10-0 Montana State at half. Jackrabbits just got nothing going. They only had about 91 yards of offense. Really got off to a great start, actually. They got Montana State going 3-and-out on the opening series. Very dominant. They got a first down right away, get to midfield, and you're thinking, okay. I mean, it was starting to look a little bit like the old semifinal, and then kind of a weird play where Gronowski was rolling out, got a little pressure, and the ball just kind of looked like it hit him on the hip or the thigh, flutters off. Montana State recovers right at midfield. They go down, punch in a little Sean Chambers touchdown, and SDSU just really looked discombobulated, honestly, for the rest of the half. And boy, Montana State I think you got to give Montana State some credit. They played a lot. I think their lines were a lot better in this game. As I'm retweeting some things here. Making sure we got this on the Twitter handle and thing. Checking out the comments and everything. But yeah, I think South Dakota State, I kind of thought there was a bit of a turning point there in the second half of that football game. Early, I thought Montana State did a little bit of a little telling there when Montana State got some celebrating going. I thought at the very end there was a big hit at the end of the half, a drive that kind of stalled. They were hooping and hollering a little bit, and we know they were up for this game. They had talked. I was sitting in on their press conference on Tuesday. No, it was on Labor Day, actually, on Monday, and they had talked about how they had this. Obviously, they had the state circle. I think Chambers had mentioned that he remembered the exact moment that game had gone final. So they had been, obviously, they wanted this opportunity, and they lived it up at the half. And I'm like, you guys are maybe celebrating a little hard here for just a really good half where while you played well, you're only up 10-0. And frankly, a couple of false start penalties. I said it on Twitter, I think. The crowd, to me, is the MVP of this game. 9 false start penalties is just – I've never heard it louder at an SDSU game. I've been to quite a few since the new stadium opened in 2016, and there have been quite a few sellouts, marker games. I can think of – I remember the first Hobo Day game, I think, with Youngstown State. I remember that being really – I remember Christian Rosenblum, I think, returning a pick 6, and it was just ear-splitting. But I've never heard it that loud at SDSU. I've never heard it that loud where it affected a team. And I think the other thing you got to bear in mind too with Montana State is it's not like they're not used to crowd noise. I mean, they play in that rivalry with Montana. Obviously, they play in a stadium where they get about 20,000 pretty regularly. I'm sure the SDSU fans who went out to Bozeman a couple of years ago for that semifinal know all too well. But I mean, when they play Montana and the Grizz at Washington Grizzly, and it's 25,000. I work there too. It gets loud and it's enclosed. It's not like they don't train for noise. Now, maybe they didn't think it was going to be as loud, or they couldn't possibly have anticipated what they were rolling into this time around. But man, 9 false. That's unheard of. I've never heard of that at this level. I can't think of many instances where, especially a team of that caliber, gets drawn off sides 9 times. And South Dakota State, the fans just rose to the occasion. And it was in key moments, too. You think of the later on in the game, I think early in the first half when they settled for that field goal, they could have easily gotten another touchdown. There was a false start that kept knocking them back. Later in the game, they had chances where they were at the 1 and they get knocked back a couple times. It just, I'm sure Montana State will say that they should have been better. I'm sure they could have, but that was crowd noise. And that bowl around the student section, it changed the game. That there's no other way. And I really hope people who are on the fence maybe about going to those playoff games when it gets cold in December. I'm not passing judgment. I know these tickets aren't cheap. I know it's cold. I know you got families, gas, everything, but and I'm not even saying you have to go to some of the early round games where maybe they're going to beat up on the cupcake, of Delaware or whoever, if it's the first round game. But that is what a crowd can do, and they need that in some of those games. That was, we heard Jimmy Rogers say in the week leading up to it that it was a playoff game, and that was a playoff crowd, and it had an effect. And imagine what that would do. The 7,000 they had a year ago in the semifinal was incredible, I thought. So, just unbelievable. They come out right away in the second half, and I think you could see how inspired they came out in that second half. Go right down the field on Montana State with their opening drive. Mark Gronowski with a 20-yard run. They just hit big plays. A big one right out of the gate with that Amar Johnson 26-yard run. Really felt like they kind of established everything again. Defensively, they came out and got a stop and then get pinned back at their own 5. Again, it kind of felt a little like the semifinal again, where they kind of just took over with their offensive lines. And then they go 95 yards early in the fourth quarter. They get the 18-yard touchdown to Zach Hines. And 16 yards, excuse me. And it just, at this point, you're thinking, okay, this thing's the train's rolling and they're going to go on. Well, then there's a bad snap. 13-10, you miss your point after, and all of a sudden, you left a little daylight. Then they get a big kickoff return to the 41. And then you bail yourself out of it with an interception, but then you get a punt block. And then there's a 3 and out, and then the punt only goes up to about the 37. I think I had a fan mention this to me online too. It's like that might have been one of the worst special team stretches I've ever seen, and it comes in a year where they actually have a full-time special teams coach. Some of that, they're just gonna have to clean that up. I don't really know any other way to say that, because that I think now, if I'm not mistaken, they have a new long snapper and a new holder, so you're gonna have some growing pains there. That's gonna happen. But the punt block, you kind of saw that coming. Unfortunately, they just kind of overwhelmed them on one side, and the kick return, those are things they're just gonna have to clean up. Checking a few things here. But, again, credit to the defense. They bowed up. To hold them at the 1-yard line was just incredible. And then you get another false start penalty, too, that, again, knocks them back. That was where the game – again, just a great defensive stand. And, again, this is no Caleb Sanders, no Reese Winkleman. I know they play a lot of different guys, but that's a tough situation for any team to be put in, and to keep it at 13-13 and then get another stop. It saved the game. Especially with a Montana State team that's just trying to run the football, and especially with Chambers, too. I think by that point, Malott, I'll be curious to find out what Malott's situation is moving forward, because he was limping pretty noticeably. He's a tough kid. I know we know what he did in that semifinal game, but he took some hellacious shots in the semifinal. He took some big hits in this game, and By the end there, obviously he just was not. You could tell he wasn't right. And Chambers is more of a Chambers is a tank. And I mean, if I had to be honest, I kind of think Chambers is a little bit better. I don't know if he's a better thrower, but yeah, I just him a lot was pretty messed up if he was not getting back in that football game. Just an unreal. So they're up 16-13, and you've got 75 yards to go. And hey, see Brendan there now. You're gonna get. What do you? I feel a little weird just being here on my own right now. I know we're chatting at midnight and watching some football here, but I think you're on mute.
You can tell it's midnight. I'm a mess.
God,
I'm a hot mess. I couldn't agree more that the special teams things were really surprising. You didn't really expect that. That hasn't been a hallmark, that of something that regularly happens to SDSU teams or anything.
Especially in a year where they now have full-time special teams coach. That's
right.
That's an interesting. I got to admit, I'm like, yeah, that. I mean, it seems like they've always had trouble with the punt return game. That's always. Yes. I feel like there's always the fumble. Somebody always fumbles a punt return in a key moment. That's been a yearly thing, but I don't remember the snap or the long. I don't remember many punt blocks before. That's not something that's really been an issue. Don't remember a ton of missed extra points. Not even really a lot of long kickoff returns either. So I mean, that had to be one of the worst of any football game I've ever seen, to be honest.
Yeah, no, the special teams were a mess the whole game. And just when things are starting to turn, then you get that punt block where it was. I mean, oh my God, things you can't afford to have happen, which, hopefully with the special teams coach, that's going to get turned around. But wow, I was really, really surprised to see that sort of stuff happen. And yeah, the student section, that's insane. 9. It was 9 offside calls. I thought it was at least 6, 9. That's, you can't.
And that was confirmed too. I heard that on the radio broadcast. I mean, I knew it was getting. It's just one of those things where it's like, this isn't. It's not like it's Drake. Who?
Right.
I guess we can mention that later. Drake had an interesting night too, so I wouldn't expect much out of that next week if you're going down to Target Field. But
probably not.
This wasn't Drake or Murray State or some team that's never played in this. Mm-hmm. The Bobcats see this at least every 2 years when they go to Washington Grizzly Stadium. They
right.
I've been to I mean, I'm sure there's fans who are getting on this now. You can't tell me maybe they just didn't think. Did they think there was only going to be 7,000 people showing up again? I don't know. If they just must not have thought the noise was going to be that big of a factor. I have no explanation for that. But the fans, to me, was the MVP because it affected it in the first half when it held. I mean, they would have had at least 2 more touchdowns. It would have been the game could have been out of reach in the first half if they'd if they hadn't gotten those false starts.
Yeah, it was one of those things. I think I put something on Twitter before this game when I would rewatch the semifinal game, and it stood out to me that in the beginning of that semifinal game with a small crowd, they had in the first quarter 3 or 4 procedural penalties. And I said, that might be an issue. And they had issues on the road last year. And I'm wondering if it's one of those deals like when SDSU went to Iowa last year and they had their plan in place for the noise, and then they said, we weren't really prepared it took us a while to get acclimated and get our plan that we had going in wasn't good. And I'm wondering if that was part of the issue. They didn't recognize the level the noise would be on and thought they could get away with a clap snap or whatever. And once they ended up down by the student section, it just fell apart. And the biggest thing when they were going into the student section and got all these penalties, it was always it wasn't in the backed up towards their own end zone where, it killed the drive.
It's right in the bowl, the horseshoe area.
Right. Instead, they were going in most of the time to score, and it stopped them from getting touchdowns, like you said. And that is, you can't even put a value on how huge that was on that game.
I mean, and you've been to, I mean, God knows how many games you guys have been to either. And I saw somebody, I'll get to this question I see from Terry about the fumble by Gronowski. I mean, I've been to a lot of games since the new stadium opened. I remember going to a few at Coughlin. I remember it getting loud for the marker games. I remember NDSU had a couple of false procedure penalties in a couple games. Youngstown, I remember it being really loud that first Hobo Day game. I remember that Rose Boom pick six. My camera audio meter just about broke. That's still that tonight was the loudest I've ever heard it. I mean, that was a legitimate football crowd. I mean, I mean, I'm not going to pretend and think we're going to get 19,000 every December now, but man, if you could get like 10 or 11,000 at a semifinal in the future, that would be. I mean, I hope this maybe takes some of the people who are on the fence. And I get it if you can't afford it or whatever, all those things. Lord knows I'm in a position where I probably couldn't if I were in there. But if you're on the fence, go, because this shows. I hope shows people how much it can affect a game, because that was a playoff crowd.
Yeah, and I think for people who, because when you have a sellout crowd, you have a lot of people who, when SDSU where it is with its fan base, not everybody in that crowd of the 19,000 go to games regularly, so they don't. This is an opportunity to gain more fans, and everyone I talked to, who we had, I think probably 15 people we knew who almost never go to games, just were excited and loved it. And I mean, what a better way for somebody to get hooked on going to SDSU games than the one that we just witnessed. So I think that'll help a lot, that and the growth in season ticket sales. If you have season tickets, instead of going to just the marker game and Hobo Day and maybe one other game, it's like, well, I got the tickets, so I might as well go up there. And, we've talked about at Jackrabbit Illustrated, we wish they'd push a little bit more the season tickets that are $100, because our season tickets were at $100 front row right on the goal line. That's crazy for 6 home games to be able to go to. So I can't imagine what the noise was like there, because we're so far north in the end zone, or in the stadium, that we can tell when the student section's loud, but you can't really get a good gauge of how loud they are, especially like when you're on the field. We had a friend visiting from Texas, and he went to some other seats that were closer to that end zone, and he's like, I could not believe how loud that was when I got down there. So,
and then the other half of it too is that people I know were commenting, like, the students all stayed. I mean, and look, and that's something I've heard from a lot of. I get that from a lot of fan bases. I've heard, you can go to Augie. Certainly, I know USD's gotten made fun of that. SDSU, I've most of the time I've been to a lot of games. I feel like there's fans have stayed. I haven't seen as many leave, but it has been noticeable this year that they're not leaving. Like, if there is anybody leaving, it's it's very small. It's like, it's been noticeable this year. The student base through 2 games has, especially even last week when, maybe they did leave, or okay, if they left during the 35, it was 42 or whatever it was. That's forgiven, but it's like, it's noticeable the turnout's a little different right now with the student section. We'll see if that continues certainly later in the year when they go on break and it gets colder.
Right.
But that was noticeable too. And I got that question asked by Terry about that fumble. I've actually pulled it up on my computer, and I did post the highlights we ran, because I ran it in the show. I do think it was a fumble. I do think he recovered it in bounds. Yeah. It's close, but I don't have I can say, if you want to go on our website and watch it, we got it up on Dakota News. I mean, it's kind of on one guy's butt, but it looks like the guy slides in and recovers it. I mean, I don't think it would have been conclusive enough to overturn it. You have to have something that's 100%, and I don't think it would have been overturned on that. So, that was my first thought on the field. I'm like, did it really get it? I mean, because I thought maybe he kicked it out of bounds, but looking at it now, I think he probably got in, and even if he didn't, he probably wouldn't have been enough to overturn it. So, probably a good call.
Yeah, well, and that whole game was so weird, but like, even that fumble, it was a weird fumble where it was almost
got pressured a little bit, and then it just kind of hit off his hip or his knee.
Yeah. Like he
kinda
lost
looking at it
track of
right
where his
now.
leg was a little bit and accidentally bumped his thigh and it just went flying. Like it's not a normal fumble you see anywhere.
And it's kind of a weird. He's also going kind of the wrong way. Like if he's going to throw, it's just going to be a contorted thing. I mean, it's obviously when he runs for the touchdown, he's going to his right side. Now he's kind of running to his left. So I don't know how he's going to throw the ball. I mean, he was going to keep. I'm guessing he would have just kept running or just tried to salvage it out of bounds. But I mean, I'm looking at it now. It basically just kind of hits up. Just as he's running, just hits off his left knee. I mean, it's just a kind of fluky. The guy from Montana State gets a finger on his foot, kind of hand on his foot, and yeah, I mean, I wasn't really anything the guy from Montana State did. Maybe getting that little bit of contact does it, but it's just very, especially because, like I said, it really felt like they were off and running at that point.
Right.
Because you get the 3 and out. I mean, it felt like a continuation, those first few plays of what we had seen in December, because they stopped the run game 3 and out. You know, they got a first down pretty easy. I was kind of shocked. Angel Johnson got a pretty big carry right away, and then we didn't see him the rest of the game.
Right.
But they went down pretty easily, and you're thinking, oh well, this looks familiar, and then all of a sudden that happens, and it turned the game around. But in Montana State's credit, and they go the short field. But again, I just think the Bobcats could have made it so much that, I thought, I understand why they were so hyped at half. They certainly were the better team at that half. They dominated, but you're only up 10-0. It's like,
right.
I'd been a little ticked off that we were only up 10-0. If I were the coaching staff, I'd be like, just get in the locker room. We can't be satisfied with this. And I'm sure SDSU, I could hear it because I was in the photographer's room next door. They were not happy. I'm sure they didn't enjoy seeing that, as much respect as they have for that team.
Yeah. Everybody in the stands when they came out, and after that first drive, everybody you talked to is like, I'm pretty sure the paint was peeling off the walls from Jimmy in that one. But this whole game felt so disjointed. Like there's specific segments that happened that the pendulum swung so far one way and so far back the other, where, that fumbles a really obvious line of it went from SDSU had total control, and then it fell apart. And then all of a sudden it's all Montana State, but they managed to not really get much for points. You're sitting at halftime.
And they only had the one touchdown on their opening drive. That's it. And I think Garrett made a good point. Both teams only had the 4 possessions.
That's crazy in one half.
There was a scout there from the Raiders, and I actually ran into. I feel like I'm gonna do the look at me Louie thing to borrow a line from Lebitard. I was talking to some of the FCS Nation guys. Stone Labanowitz, I finally met him. It was kind of fun.
Yeah, he's
reminiscing. Cool, yeah, he was. I mean, it was fun when he played the villain a few years ago, but that guy was a fun character. I mean, I wish we had more guys like that, even though he would drive his coaches nuts, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
But to me, Vegan was an NDSU guy. I mean, I'm not sure if he's a Bison alum. I can't remember that.
He is, because in one of his press conferences, he was talking about how his entire career, like including playing in college, Coach Stig coached against him.
Yeah, I worked in Fargo from 06 to 10, so he was out there with them. But he grew up in Buxton, North Dakota. Yeah, he was a North Dakota State alum too. But he'd been with Bowl for a while, and what they kind of did tonight, I thought maybe it was adjustment because they didn't really pass. Although I know they had a couple receivers who were out for this game. Mm-hmm. It reminded me a little bit of kind of the early. When you look back to where North Dakota State, when they got on that run of championships, reminded me of the very early part with kind of the Brock Jensen, where it was just very heavy quarterback power run, chew up clock, not a whole lot of they really did not pass. Now, again, receivers were out, and maybe they just didn't feel like they could get anything going, but it just felt like they were content and maybe that was the way to go because they were getting enough to where it was kind of the 3 yards in a cloud of dust.
Yes.
They were going to grind the clock. And that was what I said at halftime. If SDSU does not come out and score right away, if they get in a 3-score hole, this is going to be tough to come back. If it's going to be these 5-minute possessions. And, thankfully for SDSU, they did.
Yep.
But, yeah, I mean, it could very well have been a situation where they were just content to run the ball. They don't need to pass if you don't get anything going offensively. So, but yeah, very different games where it was ball control in the first half. And I think there hadn't been a play of more than 30 yards. I think you had the Gronowski run of 20 yards. I think that was maybe the longest, and then the Mars run of 26, but they hadn't really given up a play of more than 30 yards until the last drive for SDSU, where you get the 40-yarder and then the 35-yarder. You've contained them all the way to this point, and then you give up 2 explosive plays, and even then, if you're a jackrabbit, I think you're saying, well, we've left them a minute 30, but they haven't been able to pass the ball. So there's no way they're going to get down. And then somehow they're at the 24, 9 seconds left. It just couldn't. It's a game. It had so many. It was like 5 different games in one, basically.
Well, yeah. And, I think the new play clock rules came into play heavily in this game without even realizing it. It made your time go so fast, but then, like you said, you score and there's a minute 30 left and you're like, yeah, they can't really pass, but the clock was stopping after every first down, and it made it extend the game that far that they were able to get into position to make it a serious threat. And I think that without noticing it at the time, that had a heavy effect on how that game played out at the end.
Certainly did. And like I said, and the other irony too, somebody brought this up, the fact there was 1 second left still, that brought back some interesting memory.
Everyone said it.
I'm sure it did. I mean, and again, full disclosure, I had to leave after I was kind of pushing it, staying as long as I did, because I left after the Wilde touchdown. Because I knew if I got caught in that mess you guys did, I was going to, and I obviously have to be back here. But I was listening on the radio, and I'm like, wow, they put 1 second back on. And that just, and it actually looked like the guy was somewhat close to catching it on the replay, but it was well short at that point. At least this time they knocked it down. But, no, and it was, well, it obviously wasn't. Was the penalty on Vegan? I haven't heard I haven't heard a press conference yet, or was it an assistant?
From what I understand, it was on Vegan, but that's what you hear in the stands.
I haven't heard any different either. I find it hard to believe. I just find it hard. He's usually kind of a mild, I don't want to say mild-mannered dude, but I find it hard to believe, because that's one he has to also kind of. I know the emotion of that moment, but dude, you can't.
Right.
You can't turn. I mean, that's still I mean, they could have still made the play. I mean, now you back it up, and Chambers took a big shot too. I mean, he got hammered on that 20 on the first one. Now you got to back him up 15 more yards. I mean, that. So I mean, that game had so many things we may never see again unless they play again in the playoffs, which could happen.
I mean, if you look at it from that standpoint of the playoffs, for Montana State, short of winning, that is the best thing you could have put on paper. You go into number one's house, you were that close to knocking them off. So this loss shouldn't ding them too much in the grand scheme of things. If they're able to run through the Big Sky, you could be looking at the number 2 seed.
Well, let me look at their schedule here, because
if you look at it, if SDSU beats NDSU, right, or vice versa, they're going to get a top 2 seed. And then, if you look at it and they're paired up with NDSU, and say SDSU wins by a little bit more, they got a good argument.
We'll say this though.
You got a brutal
October 28th. They got to go to Idaho.
Yeah. Yep.
I am a believer. I mean, I'm sure a lot of Jackrabbits fans are. for those who don't know, and we'll cover other things than SDSU. I mean, certainly this is Czech Rabbit Illustrated that we're doing on the plat, but they and I thought this was going to happen because Nevada is basically a dumpster fire right now. But they thrashed Nevada today, 33-6. Jason's got that thing. He's getting that thing going, and I think that game might be their. It says, is that their ESPN game? No, it's ESPN Plus. So I know the Vandals are hosting one of them, but I think that could be trouble for them.
That's a tough one because that's in the Kibbe Dome too, isn't it?
Yep, that's the Kibbe Dome, and they also have to. Their end of the year game is at Montana. Now we don't know. We still don't really know what Montana is yet. They don't really have a tough game, but it's at Washington Grizzly, which is never. That's. You always kind of think the home field is going to be an advantage of some kind in that game, and it's just you never know what you're going to get in that game. It is. Before SDSU NDSU became what it is. It is the most consequential game in the FCS. It was. I don't think it is anymore, but it's easily one of the top. It's one or two in terms of rivalries. I think in FCS, it's 1A, 1B, whatever you want to call it. So they've got some tougher road. I think they've got a little tougher, and they also have to go to Sacramento State. Now I don't know I think the Hornets are a little. I don't know if we're going to see our old friend Carson Camp unless there's an injury over there, and that's actually the ESPN2 game that they're going to get in a few weeks. But it's a little tougher road for them, literally, because they've got to play those. I mean, that's a back-to-back. They got to go to Sacramento State, to Idaho in back-to-back weeks, and then you end at Montana. I mean, first of all, that's a, and they also have to go to Weber State. I mean, that's a brutal road schedule in a year where you have to go in your non-conference. So I don't know if they're going to run through undefeated. I mean, that could be a bit of a challenge. If they do, then they're absolutely a 2 seed. I don't even care if, I don't care if I don't care if somebody else goes undefeated. They would be the 2 seed.
Yeah. It's kind of weird. It's funny. It's almost like if you look at SDSU's home and road schedule from last year to this year, and then Montana State's home and road schedule from last year to this year, they're polar opposites each year. They flipped, where last year they got all their tough games at home, and now this year they're all on the road. So
I think that was probably something that made the SDSU title a year ago sweeter, and probably I think we always looked at it like, well, in theory, SDSU's best road to a title will be the year where they're playing NDSU and UNI at home, and oh boy, but it's gonna be tougher when they have to go on the road. They went through and won those games. I mean, so that's usually when you think the tougher stretch is gonna be in it.
Right.
So maybe it works that way for them. I don't know, but I really like. I think Idaho's gonna be a top 8 seed. I really believe in what. And I hope they're for SDSU's sake, I hope they're on the opposite end, because I would not want to see Eck until the title game, because I kind of, the fear I would have, it would be fun, but the fear I have is he knows where the bodies are buried. And if you see him if you don't see him until a title game, he knows where the bodies are buried. He recruited these guys.
And as creative as he is.
Yeah.
The only thing I think might be better in a championship game is if you got Idaho, a dome team, in a game like Montana State semifinal, where they might not function as well if it's a real nasty, bitter blizzard game. But otherwise, it's championship. I wouldn't want to face them second round where it's coolish.
You never know in Texas. I mean, there was a game, I think. I think the one before. I think there was one with NDSU and Eastern Washington where it was really cold night. You never know what it's like down in even though you'd think it's going to be perfect. There's years where Frisco is kind of weird. So, yeah, I mean, I do think the Idaho SDSU game is coming. I think eventually we're getting that. I don't know what's going to be this year. I've seen a few comments here, and I kind of want to address this because I think it's an interesting point. Who's better, Malott or Chambers? And I lean to Chambers, and I do. I really, and that's weird to say because we know what he did in that semifinal. I mean, he was the MVP when they beat him. There's no question.
Mm-hmm.
And
Chambers made some really good throws this game. And
there's another question I think you can also throw is, should they have tried to push the ball downfield a little more? I mean, his first real throw I remember was the one where he got picked off. I'm like, ugh, maybe that's why they don't pass.
Right.
But then when it was on the line, it's like, well, he looked pretty good.
I think some of it is, like you said, they're doing the early years of NDSU with vegan play calling, which obviously, if I'm a Montana State fan, that's music to my ears. That's reminiscent of something that turned out so well. But also when you're shortening the game as much as they are with that offensive style, any turnover is magnified times 1,000. So it's almost like they're, I don't want to say afraid, but really, really leery of having to go through the games where quarterbacks that haven't been allowed to throw a lot are going to have their growing pains, and they don't want to have to work through those and have it hurt them.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's actually, I gotta look up their roster. I think he's 7th year, to be honest. I mean, he's been around, but he's been around the block. I mean, I think you also have the thing, and I'm not going to pretend I was in Montana forever. I worked about a half a year there. I thought I was in Missoula. They're about 3 hours apart, Missoula and Bozeman. They have their own little TV. It's kind of weird. They have their own TV setups. It'd be like if Vermilion were 3 hours and had their own separate TV stations. But I mean, Butte's right next to it. I mean, certainly if Chase Mason ascends at some point, we're all probably going to favor him a little more because he's right down the road in Viborg. I mean, everybody gets it when there's a local kid. You want to maybe pull for that kid to be a little more successful. But I don't know. In Montana, maybe it's because they recruit more out of that state than even per se here. There's just a different vibe with the way they treat their kids there. And so he's a little bit more of a local legend.
Mm-hmm.
I think there probably is a little more pressure probably to play him, but I just look at Chambers and he's built like a tank. Yeah. He's very tough to take down. Malot's very tough. I don't know what kind of throwers they are. I don't watch them that much. I mean, and again, I don't know about these receivers. I think one of them was a transfer, I think actually from Colorado State, who I think was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
That semifinal game, it just felt like he was throwing jump balls, and they had a really athletic guy who was jumping up for it. I just feel like Chambers is better. And I like that. I like it when they can run Malott and they can do some of that gadget stuff. I don't remember it working that well today. I just feel like Chambers right now gives you the better look, and I think they're going to have and we'll see how badly Malott's hurt, but man, I mean, he was at Wyoming. I mean, he was at Wyoming in 2021. He was at Wyoming from 2018 through 21, and obviously got to Montana State. And that could have been. We heard all that stuff from fans about he is a local legend. We heard all that stuff about the turf last year. To me, that was the bigger thing, was when Chambers left, because he hurt his leg. He hurt his leg when on that sneak, which is why I always say, well, maybe you do get leery of a quarterback sneak on 4th and 1. Hurt his leg when they went right down the field that opening drive. They had to earn it, but they did score. They looked like they were going to make it a game. He goes out, and they did not look the same the rest of that game. And that to me was the bigger factor than the weather or the turf or whatever.
Yep.
So I don't know. I think they're going to have. It's going to be interesting, I think. And if but they've obviously they found a pretty good mix with it last year, so something works. But man, I'm more impressed every time I see Chambers, and I think he'd be I don't know how you bring that guy down.
Yeah, they like using that misdirection stuff with both quarterbacks in the backfield so much. I think they have a hard time switching to a single quarterback offense. Honestly, their O-line gave the chain gang some trouble, and they still really were cracking some holes.
Still a new defensive line too. I mean, I know they rotate through and they've got a lot of depth, but man, Sanders and Winkleman by the end of that thing were just dominant along that line. You can't maybe by the, I think Tervier, certainly by the playoffs, he usually becomes kind of a beast. And, they had that. I think they had the transfer. I think Brian Williams had a pretty good breakthrough game today. The guy from Valdosta looked really good.
Yep.
But, some of those guys you just don't replace right away. It's going to take a little time. And, maybe in a game like this that comes through. But important thing is you're 2-0.
Right.
And I think, I mean, and again, you've set yourself up into a nice spot where, you've got what will be a layup next week against Drake.
Yep.
It'll be a fun experience. I will say if there's a direct line to Justin Sell and Leon Costello, who are the ADs, Leon, who worked for a long time at SDSU, get this series on the books because it feels like a rivalry. I think it is a rivalry.
Yep.
I don't think you want to do it every year because it's I think the next meeting's in 2025 in Bozeman.
Yep.
I don't think you want to do it every year because you don't necessarily want to play a non-conference game with this much at stake every single year. You do want your FBS game, but man, I think they played it they had it in 2018 and 19 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that was when Randy, I think what was his name? Randy Choate was the coach.
Yes.
He was building the program up, but they weren't there yet. You get the feeling they're going to see each other again in the playoffs, but schedule this every 2 years or so. Just keep this series going because it's so good right now. And rivalries are made from important games and games they can develop out of nowhere. Literally, who would have ever thought it would be Montana? I think a lot of people when this transition happened probably would have said, "Oh, maybe they'll get something going with Montana," because the Grizz were for so long kind of the premier name. They had the 20-year streak, and the Grizz have kind of retreated, and they've just kind of been foundering for the last 15 years or so. I mean, I'd like to see them get a series going with them, but Montana doesn't really challenge themselves in the non-conference, and I think that's what hurts them a lot nowadays too. I mean, I think they played some games with UNI, but I think they saw them go play. They went to not Dixie State. I guess it's Utah Tech now today. So congratulations for challenging yourself with a really hard road game there. But so I guess to wrap up a little bit of the SDSU portion, maybe hit a few other games. There's still a few actually going on. We've got Stanford, a classic battle between the Big Ten and the ACC between Stanford and USC that's still going on right now.
What a mess that is.
The other game I was at today, I'm sure some people were a little eye on it, was USC St. Thomas.
Raised some eyebrows at halftime, that's for sure. Like, ooh.
Yeah. I think their defense has some potential. I like those linebackers. I like Hillis. They have another guy by the name of, I believe I gotta look it up again. Lease. He's a junior. He was really good. What's his name? Nick Gase. My bad. Gase. I'm not pronouncing the name right. Again, I'm not gonna overstate it because we know it's a non-scholarship team. It's a pioneer team. But you still got to go play, and I still think I think a team that's filled with guys who are out of the Twin Cities is probably going to be better than a lot of teams. So, I think defensively they have some potential there. I think their offensive line's a mess. They could not run anything between the tackles today. I was shocked that to me. I mean, Travis Tice is a good runner. I didn't hear a Jackrabbit fan say a bad word about him. I mean, he was probably I think Jackrabbit fans who watched him last year probably thought he was maybe the best offensive player they had, which I realized wasn't saying much the way that went. I mean, he just had nothing up the middle. They got some stuff to the outside. Nate Thomas really looked explosive. They brought him in late in that game, and he had a great run. I don't know why they waited till the end. Maybe they're just trying to ease him back in. Again, I'm sure that's another name the Jackrabbit fans here are going to – they have zero chance. Well, we know that. They're not going to win a national title. They can't even make the playoffs. No Pioneer team. I will say this. We've seen a Pioneer League team win a playoff game.
Yep.
They could easily win a playoff game when they become eligible. That is easily because they don't go in right away and play a number 1 seed. They'll go play Cal Poly, well, it was Cal Poly who lost. They'll play whoever I don't know, Youngstown or somebody who's like a fringe bubble team. Yep. So they could easily win a playoff. And I think they're going to try hard to get to the Valley at some point. I don't think they're in this just to be a non-scholarship fiddly-do. We're out. I think they want to be a player in the FCS. And I don't know how I know North Dakota State wouldn't feel very good about that because they recruit the Twin Cities heavily. I don't know how SDSU would feel about that. But they would make a lot of sense in the Valley if they do ever want to make that move.
I've looked at that and, being a Pioneer League school, not offering scholarships, and I'm sure they offer some, grants and in kind and stuff like that. But still, if you look at the costs for them to go full scholarship from non-scholarship, because you're losing the revenue of those kids. Because for D3 schools and stuff like that, your football team, that brings in money to the school because each one of those kids is paying tuition to go to the school.
Right.
So when I punched up the numbers, and this isn't taking into the academic equivalencies, all this other stuff that can knock down the money that they bring in from these students, but it was like $1.6 million a year swing, because then they've got to add scholarships for the women's sports and everything else. It is a huge commitment when, for a lot of mid-major schools, especially a private like St. Thomas, and not saying they don't have the money to do that.
We know their endowments up there. So
right. But if they wanted to, they're putting all this huge money into that new basketball, facility.
Yeah, the hockey basketball facility.
Yep. And that just screams, which I personally think they have the potential to do,
Big East.
Work their way Big East.
Valley.
And
or Mo Valley, the other
right,
the more traditional Mo Valley, I guess.
Right, and that's kind of the natural stepping stone, Valley, Big East, or whatever. And will they want, if that's their goal, do you want to be dumping or having a $1.6 million swing into a FCS football program? I don't know if that's something they want to do.
Yeah, and that echoes too. I'd spoken to a couple people that I know within their department. They said it's not as easy as people think it would be.
Right.
But I still kind of get the twinkle in the eye that I think it'll be a patient thing, and I think eventually it's a route they want to. And they would also have to upgrade their field. They've got a nice little field, but it would definitely need to do some work in terms of making it something I think that the Valley would be. Although then again, I've looked at what Murray State has. I guess I shouldn't.
Right.
Maybe not. But
Garrett says if they join the MVFC, they would absolutely start scholarships. Well, they have to.
Yeah, they would.
The MVFC would not take.
They wouldn't bring them aboard. No. And there's another idea. Would they think about joining another
Ohio Valley?
About the Ohio Valley. Could they go? If it's just about, would you go to some other league, dominate it, and then so you maybe have a better chance to get in the? I don't know. I think they would want to, but I just think, man, you're in the Twin Cities. You could probably get some guys who are maybe getting booted off the Gophers or something.
Right.
You could put together a pretty good FCS team on scholarships at that level. And that's basically NDSU built the first part of their dynasty with Twin Cities guys who Tim Brewster just totally ignored.
Right.
There's a team to be built there. So, but anyways, as it terms to what they had today, I was impressed. I also think Glenn Caruso is a really good young coach who could maybe be looking to move on at some point too. And I kind of thought that maybe this was going to be his statement of sorts. And, I think he has, they played hard. They're offensively, they just didn't have much. I think they were without their top quarterback too, but, like I said, Aiden Bauman, I do believe he's a player. I think you've heard that from a lot of media guys.
Mm-hmm.
Really composed, can kind of, for big guy, he's pretty fluid, makes some good plays. Jack Martins has been kind of a nice surprise at receiver, but yeah, I don't know about their own line. They need to figure some stuff out there. They can't be that one dimensional. They have to figure out how to run the football, or they're going to get And Bauman took a pretty bad shot. He right before half, he was down on the turf. So I don't know.
Oh Lord, that's not.
Yeah,
good
I mean it. The nice thing is they've got Lamar. They got Lamar next week. They should roll through them. I think they open with. I know they got NDSU for an opener, but a couple of their first. I mean, they got 4 of their first 5 games at home. Now the last home game is at SDSU, so
yeah,
it gets a little. But they've got a chance. I don't know. And they've got Murray State at home, so there should be 3 wins there. But it was a little alarming. I think you have to be a little alarmed if you're a Coyote fan at how close that game was. But at the same time, win's a win. So you move on, and at least they did put them away in the second half.
When I was looking at that, coming in St. Thomas, they struggled with their first game that was a non-D1 team.
Which Black Hill State.
Yeah, which happens with Pioneer League schools, and that's fine. But, you look at how a bad Southern Utah did against St. Thomas, and they hammered them, which you should. But when you see USD, who I was thinking of as kind of a dark horse playoff potential team just because of the schedule laid out, and then you only win 24-7. That's
I mean, it's
concerning. Do you think there's the potential for that offense to take a leap forward as the season goes on because Josh Davis is a new coordinator? Or is it just mostly this O-line's a mess and
there's always, the first couple weeks are always kind of a lie in a sense.
Right.
Every team's going to get better. Every team's going to deal with injuries. I kind of want to see him feed the ball more to Nate Thomas. It was weird that I'm looking at their box score now. I didn't see him at all early in the game. He got 5 carries for 35 yards. Most of it came on his 25-yard touchdown in the fourth. He looked, maybe they're just easing him back into it. Tice went 16 for 51. So, they started to get a little more push in the second half, and you kind of would expect that against a team they figured to overpower. They had some stuff to the out. It seemed like they were able to get a little off tackle. I think there's some room. Nielsen, but it's just concerning because Nielsen identified. He said we have to run better, and you thought coming into this game you expected they were going to run better, thought they were going to establish it, and they couldn't, and they kind of went away from it in the first half, and they seemed to have a little success with it in the second. I think there's room to get better. I do, like I said, I believe in Bauman. I think he's a better. And I realize Camp took him to a playoff, but just think Bauman's a better quarterback, a little bit more composed, and is a little less likely to, cave if there's pressure or make a bad throw. I think he's not Strevler. He's not going to kill you with his legs, but he's going to make some plays that a guy like Camp, just a lot of guys can't. So, and like I said, they're going to kill them. They'll beat Lamar fine next week, so there's not a whole lot there. I think they'll be 2-1, and then they'll.
If they don't beat Lamar, then that is a 5-alarm fire.
Oh my, yeah, that's going to be, yeah, and it should be another game. I guess I should take a look at what Lamar did today before we move on to the rest of the Missouri Valley. Yeah, and they're openers with NDSU. That's the other thing that's kind of concerning is you have to go to the Bison with your conference opener at the end of the month.
Right.
Like I said, it's not a good time to be questioning your offensive line at this point. But, Lamar is 0-2 right now. What do they do today? The Cardinals. They lost to – actually, they kept it respectable with Louisiana Monroe, 24-14. So,
wow.
That's not bad for playing not a high-level FBS team, but you're not a high-level FCS team.
Right. I know. I think it was Idaho beat them like they owed them lunch money.
Yeah, it was bad. They had they had their receivers throwing touchdowns. It was bad, and it was in wherever Lamar is. I don't know, Texas somewhere.
San Antonio. I think it's in San Antonio.
Yeah, or is that Incarnate? I know Incarnate Word's in San Antonio.
Yeah, I've drove under Lamar. There's a bridge and it says Lamar University, and you're like, oh, what a beautiful area for a college. It's not true. It's terrible. It's awful.
It's so been that much of Texas.
It's bad.
Well, looking around the rest of the valley, I haven't heard much about this, but interesting score. Looks like Northern Iowa's in their annual "Let's Start Like Crap." Although they always play a tough schedule. They lose to Weber State at the Dome today, 34-17. Another Big Sky Valley game.
Just dangerous. It's as the prophecy always foretells that once they have to face SDSU mid-season,
And on
they're going to
Oboe
be
Day.
fighting for their lives for the playoffs, and that's when you never want to face them.
Yeah, Theo Day in that game, 23 of 41, 312 yards, a touchdown, but 3 picks. So not his best day. Weber State had a running back go for 144 and 3 tutties. Yeah, Weber State, good defensive team too. So they've had a bit of a series going on with them. Looks like Weber's still gonna be a pretty rugged team coming out of the Big Sky. Youngstown played at Ohio State, lost 35. They were in that game for about a quarter. So I'm still kind of curious to see what Youngstown's gonna be. Could have been a playoff team last year, but they weren't going to beat the Buckeyes, but made it interesting.
Hey, you don't lose by 50 to Ohio State. You're not a bet. It's a pretty good showing. Let's be honest.
The first FCS over FBS game this year, before actually Jason X Idaho team, was Southern Illinois beating Northern Illinois 14-11.
Yeah.
Which I feel like once again we're going to have the. You talked about the prophecy with Northern Iowa. It's going to be the discussion once again of what is Southern Illinois.
Yep.
Are they going to actually be a contender? Are they just going to fall off the map? I got no clue what the hell they are every year. Nick Baker is still with them. I'm looking at this line score. None of this line score looks particularly impressive. So maybe it just speaks to how they picked off the quarterback for Northern Illinois, Rocky Lombardi, who was actually playing in the Big Ten not that long. But they picked him off 3 times. So maybe that's the biggest takeaway is they maybe have a better defense this time around.
Which is weird because didn't they just lose their coordinator to NDSU?
Yeah, although the thing of it is, I remember their defense was terrible.
Right.
Their defense was terrible if he went to NDSU, I would be asking why the Bison wanted him because they were getting mulched. But they're now 2-0. Kind of look at their schedule. I'm not sure if they do have South Dakota State on the schedule. They'll host the Jacks in October 14th. Again, you never know. Or no, October 21st. My bad. Of course, the last time they played each other was that infamous game where SDSU blew the 21-point lead at home. I think it was.
Yeah.
It could be a bit of a trap game, maybe. They've come a long way, obviously, since that game as a program SDSU has. But
well, there was a lot of similarities between that year with the blowout in the regular season and then the playoff game. And then how this Montana State blowout in the playoffs and then this regular season game all of a sudden was a nail biter that had to be pulled out of the fire.
On Southern Illinois, by the way, they get another interesting game. They go to Southeast Missouri next week. So if they win that, they're 3-0. They'll get Missouri State, who looks like they're not doing too well out of the Bobby Petrino era. Missouri State today lost to – pulling up here. They're now 0-2. They lost to UT Martin 38-31. So it doesn't look like it's going too well post Petrino. If Southern Illinois wins next week, there's a pretty good chance they're going to be 4-0, 5-0 coming out of it. So Valley could be putting itself in a decent position. NDSU, I don't know if there's much to say when we knew they were going to kill Maine and they beat them 44-7. I haven't caught any of those highlights yet, but Maine was a pushover. So
yep.
Cam Miller. The one thing I'm a little interested at is they're really trying to work Cole Payton in a lot.
Yes.
And he ran for 102 yards today. Again, taking into account, we know the opponent's not any good, but they're really trying to – I thought that kid might transfer because Cam Miller has said he's coming back next year.
Yep.
They're trying to appease him or because he's been one of their higher touted quarterback prospects. I think he was maybe even higher rated than Lance was a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw last year. That interception he threw in the marker game, that you could argue that maybe changed both teams' seasons. So they have to find some way to get him on the field. Is obviously what they're thinking. We'll see if it actually translates when they start playing teams that are better able to match up with them a little more than Eastern Washington and that. But I think that kind of bears some watching. Maybe they're trying to do like what we're seeing with Montana State. I don't know. North Dakota took care of Northern Arizona pretty easily, 37-22. Illinois, we actually had a conference game. Illinois State beat Western Illinois 34-18.
Illinois State, well, I guess that was ESPN, and their FCS scores have been all over the place. But it told me that for a while, Western Illinois was beating Illinois State in that game, but I'm not sure if that was accurate because
it was 13. It was 13-9 at half. That's Illinois State. Okay. So it was. It was a decent game for a half for a little while, but Western Illinois still slogging through trying to find their. The Ohio Valley is getting a hell of a team there, and of course, earlier in the week we had Indiana taking care of Indiana State 41-7, and Louisville blanking Murray State. So the Valley is the Valley at this point, and I'm kind of encouraged by some of the early results, especially after the Valley kind of had a bit of a rough opening week. But we'll see. Next week next week North Dakota heads to Boise, which could get interesting. I don't know. Boise's 0-2. Maybe if North Dakota's got anything of interest, maybe they show something next week. Indiana State goes to Ball State. Mentioned Lamar in South Dakota. Robert Morris at Youngstown. Illinois State, Eastern Illinois, Central Arkansas, North Dakota State. I don't know if the Sugar Bears have anything. Northern Iowa's at Idaho State. Murray State's at Middle Tennessee. Man, Murray State must be needing to pay the bills if they're playing a bunch of FBS games. Yeah. I mentioned that Lindenwood's at maybe Western Illinois finally gets off the schneid against Jed Stewart and Lindenwood. And then, of course, Drake in South Dakota, and I kind of teased this as we probably wrap up the night here, but you're wondering how the Drake Bulldogs did tonight. They played another defending national champion, the Northwestern Red Raiders. They're 0-1 against defending national champions. The Red Raiders went to Des Moines tonight and won in overtime, 27-24.
Oof.
That's an NAI now, like St. Thomas. That's a non-scholarship team.
Yep.
And I think they're picked pretty low. I mean, Drake's had some good teams in the past, but they've been kind of a bad run of late. But yeah, this was not a surprise. I've seen them lose to Grandview and Northwestern is really good, but yeah, this is not going to be a game next week.
No, I feel bad for them with an SDSU.
It'll be cool to play at Target Field.
Yeah, you're getting an SDSU team that's going to be probably not fully satisfied with their efforts in the first half of this game this weekend, and that might get taken out on poor Drake here a little bit.
Yeah, well, and it's just looking at a few of the stats. I did want to try and show this because like Northwestern's in our coverage area, and they're usually pretty fun. I mean, I always kind of make a fun point of saying this. I'm like, they're the only other team that recruited Christian Roseboom, although that was mainly because he was a family legacy there.
Right.
I still can't get over that, but maybe look. Yeah, I mean, Northwestern ran for $145 on them and threw for 224, so they kind of did whatever they wanted. Drake only ran for 100 on them, passed for a little bit. So yeah, Northwestern did almost anything they wanted to. I'm pretty sure South Dakota State will do anything and then some. It'll probably be, I don't know if it'll be as bad as the Western Oregon game, but
it might be
at
worse.
Least. I don't know. I mean, I think I did hear that they have maybe one NFL prospect on their roster somewhere. I mean, they actually did have a tight end who got drafted a few years ago.
Yes, they did.
I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe the betting thing here would be when do they pull the starters?
Right.
At this point, I don't. Yep. It's not going to be. Go down, enjoy the beer. Hopefully, you don't. You have a good time. I know I'm actually going to be at a wedding next week. Although maybe we'll still do this. I'm going to At this point next week, I'm sure I'm going to be watching Colorado State get completely and utterly destroyed.
Yeah. That's
I mean,
tough
and
one.
game day's going to Boulder next week too, so that's going to be terrific.
Hey, extra spotlight, you lucky duck.
About time they featured a Rocky Mountain Showdown. I'm sure we'll get equal coverage on that thing.
They'll say Colorado State at least twice.
And actually, NDSU plays them SCU next year.
Do they really? Oh, that's a spicy meatball.
Yeah, the Bison versus the Buffaloes. I got to double check now. I believe it's next year. I mean, that'll. I
forgot they had that game scheduled.
Yep, next year, August 31st in Boulder. That will be. When they scheduled it, that was the one you thought for sure. Okay, there's just another.
Yep.
NDSU FBS win, and now it's like, well, it'll be. I don't know. Part of me still wonders if Prime will still even. I just don't know if he's a long haul guy for Boulder. I really don't.
He'll probably do what he did at Jackson State and spend a couple of years there. What's funny is there was a lot of chirping when he was at Jackson State and from the Jackson State fans about, oh yeah, we're better than the NDSUs, SDSUs, and whatever in the world. And there was quite a bit of bickering amongst the fan bases. And now 2 years later, they'll get to showdown against Coach Prime, just with a different team.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, at this point, well, I'm guessing we know Travis Hunter, I don't think he'll be there because he'll go out to the draft.
Yep.
I think his kid, I'm not sure if his son will be the quarterback. I'm not sure what Shadur would be but I mean, but if he's still there, he's going to get probably the number. I mean, that's why I keep telling people, it's like, you got to get on board with the way he does, like how many other guys are Deion Sanders?
Right.
If there's a Deion Sanders out there, I want him.
Exactly.
There's one. Although I've allegedly heard, apparently there is a claim he was interested in Colorado State. Apparently that was floated by his quote unquote people. I've asked people about that. And I'm like, either way, if my alma mater did have a chance and blew that, it's just we're stupid like that. But I mean, there's one guy who can pull in those kind of recruits, and it's not because of his style. It's because he's in Hall of Fame, greatest of all time in his position. Yeah. If his name is Larry his name's George Sanders, and he's never played a down in the NFL, and he's talking like a Baptist preacher, nobody's going to give a damn. Right. You have to have the credentials to back it up. So, I think that'll be put like this, I don't think I would be scheduling Colorado anytime soon if I were SDSU or anybody who wants to go play a winnable FBS game anymore.
Well, you know what? Right around now would probably be when you would want to schedule Colorado because that's going to be about 6 years out. Prime won't be there anymore.
Well, the funny thing is, I don't know if he would go to Florida State because now, I always thought maybe he'll just go back to Florida State, his alma mater, but now they look like they're kind of in a decent place moving forward. So I don't know, but I hate that I'm going to have to watch that next week, but hopefully we'll make a regular thing out of this. I don't know if we'll go an hour each time. Fairly certain we won't have an hour to talk about with Drake.
No, probably not.
We might not have 5 minutes, 15 minutes to talk about with Drake next week, but thanks for doing this. I think this was hopefully this was fun. Get some more guys in next time since I know a lot of you guys got home late.
Yeah, that was
get some more.
That was tough.
Yeah, well, I guess that kind of I've always been kind of the camp that I wish they had a few more night games, but I can see why there is some wisdom to not doing that out here.
They're fun, but man, you fill that stadium, and it takes a while to clear some of them parking lots because there's not a lot of ways off of campus.
Well, and this has to be because most of the time they play these night games, they're playing a cupcake. I mean, it's not usually the only time I'm in terms of like games that actually came to the final minute.
Yeah.
I'm thinking the only other one was probably Cal Poly, the one they lost back in 2016.
Yeah, that's the only one that really comes to mind.
They never, I mean, obviously they never really play it later in the year when it gets colder, unless it's a playoff.
Right.
Every other one is usually just Drake or Butler. I remember they played Montana State when Montana State was bad, but yeah, they don't really. So maybe in those other games, at least people start leaving early. But yeah, when you have a game like this that comes down to the last minute, everybody's gonna be. It's gonna be backed up forever. At least it didn't seem like they had as much construction around town. So hopefully that helped people get out a little bit. But well, thanks for hanging around. To anybody who joined us, we'll try and do this probably about 11 o'clock in the future, I think, or whatever. And yeah, that was a hell of a game, and I hope everybody enjoyed this. And I hope I didn't talk too much. So
you're great. Thank you for doing this with us here at JI. We appreciate the hell out of it.
Thank you, guys. It's good to be somewhere where they're passionate about FCS football. We can talk about it, and man, we got a lot to talk about this season. It's gonna be a fun year all the way through. I have a feeling January.
Yes, hopefully, Lord willing. Hopefully, we don't get a Friday night semifinal at some point. That
you never know. That could be fun. Whatever it takes to get. I'd prefer one of those afternoon semifinals, though. The sun. I'm okay with the 11 a.m. games. Those 7 o'clock night games. I know you get maybe the big ESPN crowd, but
yeah, that would be a cold one. So.
All right, well, folks, take it easy. Have a good night, and we'll talk to you again next week.